a kingdom of priests. A kingdom of priests. The holy place is the room of the priests. That's where the priests are active. That's where the priests are busy. The priests are busy doing things in the holy place. That's the middle room. Out here you've got the outer court. You have the holy place. Then you have the most holy place, which the only other 4 square room mentioned in the Bible is the New Jerusalem. And as we go and move into chapters 20, 21, and 22, you'll hear us again bring the parallel between the New Jerusalem and the most holy place. So even being called kings and priests entails that you have now moved into the holy place. And it's in the holy place that the priests are gathered to worship, to bake bread, to have the bread ready, to keep the candles staying lit. The candles lit, the fire burning. Intercession and worship is all happening by the priest in the holy place. But as we go through these 7 churches, and if I would just take the promises to the overcomers, well, this is good right here. It's not in your notes, it's just extra. If I just took the promises of the 7 churches to the overcomers, if I just took the promises of the overcomers, I would show you that every one of the promises of the overcomer are all descriptive of what is in the most holy place. So the promise of the promise of the overcomer is a movement into the most holy of all. We all quiet, don't make me really nervous. And so as we look at the churches, and there's some problems in these 7 churches, there's some things in these 7 churches that Christ is going to condemn. There's some things that he's even going to say, I hate. The deeds of the Nicolaitans, that tolerating Jezebel. There's some strong statements made of Christ concerning the 7 churches. But if we focused on the overcoming promises, every overcoming promise has something to do with the most holy place. Now, I just thought that was profound when I looked at that. That means when we view the church and we're critical of it, we have to remember that God has such a great plan for the church that he sees us in the fulfilled state while we oftentimes judge one another in what seemingly is a weakened condition. Can y'all hear that? So, some of us who've been in church a long time can get cynical about the church. We can become somewhat discouraged by our experiences in the church. I will tell you, the hardest person in the world to counsel and to reach is somebody that's been hurt in church. Your hurt feelings, you can, and that takes a while too, but you can move into healing in areas of hurt feelings. But hurt faith can take a lifetime to overcome. And so, while many of us have experienced difficulties in the church, we still believe that God has something great for the local church. Can you say that? I just believe God still loves the local church, and his heart is the local church. And so in these 7 churches, we're going to see the good, the not so good, but then we're going to see the promises that are profound. Well, in our notes tonight, what I did was I looked at some ways the 7 churches have been interpreted, at least in my generation. And so we'll look at some of these ways of looking at the church, and then we'll get into at least the study of the church at Ephesus. But notice in your notes that one of the first, and this is the way I initially understood the 7 churches. I was taught that the 7 churches represented 7 periods of church history. And so I had written down to you that Ephesus was probably 30 to 100 AD, Smyrna 100 to 313 AD, so forth and so on. This is a dispensational view of the seven churches. That's not to say that's the only way to understand the church, but there are some who have believed that the seven churches represent periods of church history, which would mean we are in the church of Laodicea, which is interesting because the church of Laodicea has a whole lot in common with the American church. There are other ways, though, to look at the seven churches. I not long ago did this study, and I'm not saying I wholeheartedly agree with this. I just think it's interesting. Hope that you do as well. I've taken each church, each of the seven churches, and correlated it with the 7 days of creation. Now, I didn't write a whole lot because I just am writing to kind of, and I'm trying to cut down some of the stuff I'm writing. So you kind of you will have to go and kind of put the pieces together. Like, for instance, the day one, let there be light. And we have in Ephesus Jesus talking about your candle and your light. And so day two with the division in Smyrna, well, then the separation, the firmament. You can just kind of go through that. I'm not saying that's really what the writer had in mind. I just think it's interesting. There's another way to look at the seven churches. It can recap kind of the Old Testament. The book of Ephesians representing the time of the garden, Smyrna, the age of the patriarchs, Pergamos, the wilderness, Thyatira, Jezebel, the kings, Sardis, the time of captivity, Philadelphia, post-exile. That's basically the minor prophets. And some of the historical books, like Nehemiah, Ezra, are post-exilic. What I mean by post-exilic, these were writings that happened after 587, 586 BC, after the capture of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and then they were released, subsequently released. That's what's known as the post-exilic exile, after the Babylonian captivity. 586, 587, my instructor Emmanuel, every time he would say that date, he would slap the backboard. That's back when we had real blackboard and chalk, and all the instructors wore chalk rather well because they'd get all up in it. But he'd always slap the backboard or the blackboard when he said 586, 587, and drilled in our thinking that was the most significant date in Old Testament history, because it was the date that the Jewish people literally lost everything that they had. They were losing their home place. They were losing the political system. They were losing their religious practices. They were losing everything. But God had a way of bringing back to them recovery. And that's why the restoration passages of the 12 minor prophets is such an interesting study. But anyway, then you have Laodicea being the time of Jesus up to, or the time just past the minor prophets, Malachi, to the time of Jesus, possibly that 400-year period there. And so there's a couple of different ways of looking at the seven churches. And then this is my view, and that is the seven churches represent not seven different understandings, but it's an understanding of the church in her completed state, a word to mature the church, a word that we are to understand the seven churches as a unit and study them as a unit, because I find something in my life in Smyrna, I find something in my life in Sardis, I find something relative to my life in Ephesus. But there's a promise in all seven of these churches that are instrumental to move my life into maturity and to move my life into fulfillment. Now, here's a powerful thought. I want you to really think this through, because this is a powerful hermeneutical kind of concept, and that's this. Seven in apocalyptic literature rarely speaks of amount, but most only represents concepts. Let me say that again. I'm not talking about in the historical books. I'm not talking about in the Gospels. I'm not talking about history. I'm not talking about in the Judges. I'm talking about in apocalyptic literature, specifically portions of Daniel, portions of Ezekiel, and the Revelation. What I'm saying is numbers often speak of concepts rather than trying to define amounts. That's why I'm not counting 24 elders and trying to make 24 becomes literal, or 4B, 7 heads, 7 eyes, 7 stars. Numbers speak of concepts. The Hebrew word for 7 is the word Sheba. Now put it here, not to be confused with the Queen of Sheba, where there, the Queen of Sheba, where she's from, that word means the old man. And I just had to put that in because there's a powerful teaching truth about the Queen of Sheba visiting Solomon. And I encourage you to read that, because as she comes and tries to inspect what she has not grown into, she represents the old trying to discover the new. I can't teach that right now, but I just couldn't see that word without just giving you something that would hope to kind of provoke you to want to study that a little bit. But Sheba, the word for 7, means completeness or fullness. And so when I look at 7 and the 7 churches, I see that they operate as a unit as they teach me something about Christ and something about myself as an overcomer. Because all of the churches begin with a revelation of who Jesus is. He says something about who he is. But it always ends with a promise to the overcomer. But now 7 is used, interestingly, all through Scripture and outside of Scripture. And I just notice how our lives are established upon a 7-day week. The colors of the spectrum, not only is the prime number, but 7 notes of the musical scale. And I demonstrated this, I won't tonight, but I can demonstrate that all improvisation on a musical instrument is nothing but a way to arrange 7 notes. Whether you love jazz or country or funk or rock or whatever you are into, all of the improvisation you hear, whatever the genre, all improvisation is just an arrangement of 7 notes. That's it.